The CDM coordinator is not only one of the newest roles in construction, it's also one of the most important. The coordinator has a pivotal role to play in providing the client with health and safety risk management advice. In effect, he or she is the client's best friend. But what exactly is required of the coordinator throughout the design and construction process, and how can it most effectively be achieved? And joining us in the studio to discuss things are Peter Capelhorn and Paul Bussey from Scott Brown Rigg. Thank you very much for coming in, gentlemen. Peter, let me start with you. What is the purpose of the CDM coordinator?
Well, really, the CDM coordinator, Martin, is somebody who should be the jam in the sandwich of the construction team. They're the person who is meant to look at what everybody else is doing and take an overview and suggest better ways of managing the health and safety, to hassle it along, to make sure that the project actually follows the recommendations of the CDM regulations.
Paul, so when is a CDM coordinator required and when is he or she not required?
The code says at initial design stage or just before, certain interpretations are slightly after, but frankly it depends on the size of project, the complexity and the needs of the team.
So in effect, Paul, with respect to health and safety risk management advice, he is the client's best friend.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Best friend as far as health and safety is concerned. He's holding the client's hand, who usually is a non-experienced client in that respect, whereas some clients are a lot more experienced in this field.
I was just going to say it's value for money. It's adding value to the health and safety, adding knowledge, helping the client through the particular issues that he's confronted with.
And when does a CDM coordinator have to be appointed?
In principle, as early as possible, but certainly after initial design or at about the time when initial design is coming to the essence of where we're going to take the project forward.
Paul, this role formerly under the old CDM regs was filled by the planning supervisor. Why in essence the change from the planning supervisor to the CDM coordinator?
Frankly, the planning supervisor name was a total misnomer. That he didn't plan, he didn't supervise. He does what the current name suggests, coordinates information, coordinates the health and safety, which the CDMC name far better reflects. But from that respect, the role has moved on further as well. Rather than as the planning supervisor worked, it has now been taken on. It's been more clarified in the current regulations as a role.
Okay, let's take a break there, gentlemen, and have a look now in a bit more detail at the duties of the CDM coordinator. The coordinator is expected to give advice to clients to help them with their duties, in particular, to appoint competent designers and contractors, to ensure arrangements are in place to coordinate and review design work, to ensure that adequate arrangements are in place for managing the project, to advise on the suitability of the initial construction plan, to ensure that the principal contractor has been given enough time to plan and prepare, to ensure that the principal contractor has prepared a construction phase health and safety plan, and finally, to draw up the health and safety file. Paul, let's start right at the beginning. Who can be a CDM coordinator?
Anybody with sufficient skills and competence to carry out the role, whether it be a designer, quantity surveyor, client, contractor, or a designated health and safety CDMC person. And often it's better to have, or it can even be a multiple of roles at different stages. The design stage would relate to a designer CDMC, whereas the contracting stage and the health and safety file could have a very different type of person. So organisations with those multi-skills could be the way of the future.
And Peter, is any special training required here? Clearly you have to have an understanding of construction.
You do, but the important thing is to have an inherent knowledge and understanding of obviously the CDM regs, but having a knowledge of what the consultants will do and what the contractor can do, and to identify issues that are important to flag up, important as I said, to draw information across the team, to bring it together so that everybody understands what are the key health and safety issues on the project and take those forward.
Give us an overview of the relationship between the CDM coordinator and the client, designer and contractor as the project progresses.
Well, for instance, if you take a situation where there is something that the designer wants to put into the project, but it's unusual, that it's not something which is normally experienced, then the client may need to take a view from the CDMC as to whether that is really something they pursue, or is it too risky, too dangerous, and therefore it should go back to the designer and reconsider it. That's where the skill of a good CDMC will come in, so that it's a matter of judgment. You don't spoil the project because something may necessarily be difficult to do, but on the same token, there's no point in taking on risks and presenting them to the contractor that can otherwise easily be designed out.
Okay, Paul, let's talk about the CDMC's responsibilities at the concept and feasibility stage of a project.
Yeah, this is often the cause of great discussion, but I see at those very early stages it's understanding what is going on the site, what are the inherent problems of that site, but also what are the key issues as far as the design are concerned that need to have CDM input. And we really see those as two issues. One is the form, mass, geometry of the building, and the other is the means by which it's cleaned or maintained, because that has fundamental impact on the scale and scope of the building. Now, I see those, at the initial design stage, those are the two major areas.
So how many major issues typically would you come across?
Well, beyond that, getting into detailed design or scheme design and detail design, you break it down to much more focused design hazards and the risk control of those hazards. But at early conceptual stages, you're, as Peter refers to, I think, as his spiral, or you're narrowing down your scope into the detail design. At early stages, it's the big concepts. Yeah. What is being influenced by the health and safety at that stage.
Right. So, Peter, would this information be conveyed in drawings, or would it be conveyed in lists?
Well, absolutely, drawings are the best way of doing it, in my opinion, because that's the language of the trade. That's what everybody understands. So, in first place, let's try and show it in drawings. Let's add notes and annotations to drawings to identify precisely what we mean. But that language can roll all the way through, from the design, from the consultants' reviews, right the way through procurement and onto site. And hopefully the objective of this is to make construction safer. And the way we do that is by getting that message across to everybody. So by all means, we can use written documentation as backup, but as far as fundamentals are concerned, it's a drawn process, a sketch process that can take us forward.
Is that something you would agree with, Paul?
Yeah, very much. I mean, our industry, certainly from a designer's point of view, I'm a CDMC and a designer, but is image-based, and those images are so much more powerful than the written lists. But having said that, I still like to have, or I like to think as CDM development as an ongoing meeting with minutes, which you can refer to throughout the course of the project, and it's nice to see them being signed off as you go. It gives a lot of confidence. Yeah. So a bit of both, I would say.
It's good compromise. It gives you the formal plus the essence of the information to take forward. And I think that's what we're trying to aim for. I think that's crucial at the end of the day.
Okay, Paul, let's move on to the construction phase. What are the CDM's responsibilities here?
Well, his role then changes, hence why sometimes it could be a different type of person. He has to have an understanding of management on-site issues, of the way a contractor is going about delivering a project, are the correct arrangements in place, and he also has to set in to train the production of the health and safety file, which is a very bureaucratic process and not necessarily akin to a designer's or someone with design empathy, their attitude. So it could move on, it could be the same person, but essentially he has no, the contractor is the principal contractor on site. The CDMC does not have a major role to play on site at that stage. He might talk to the design team about the changes and how they could be implemented in a safe manner. That is his primary design issue.
Peter, is your experience mirrored by that?
Well, it is. I mean, it's like with many other consultancy roles. There is a wide variety of experience and application of the detail. And to a large degree, we do see that pattern happening on construction sites. But we also have the almost invisible CDMC at one stage, one element, and we also on the other end have the CDMC who is overbearing, who is completely absorbed with trying to enforce unnecessary procedures. And I think where we need to go with the industry is to try and encourage the middle ground, because that's where the future lies.
Let's talk about risk analysis. What role does the CDM coordinator play here? Tell us a bit about that.
With risk analysis, it can be a very complicated issue, but again, the CDMC should be using their expertise to identify where the risk analysis is going between all the parties within the construction team. It is up to the individual consultants to identify the risk, to identify the challenges, so we say, that they've got to take account of. And the CDMC should be there as a referee, if you like. They should be saying, are you sure you're right? You question your analysis. They shouldn't at any stage be getting into identifying what the risks are themselves, in my opinion. It should be very much one of standing back and managing the process.
This is where we slightly differ, to the extent that I think perhaps if he is a catalyst, being a health and safety professional 100% of his time, he can actually be a catalyst and help the design team develop the scheme.
Fair enough.
And this is where there's the discussion of whether he's a designer or just straightforward CDMC sitting in the background, and I'd rather the former.
Well, no, I agree with you, Paul, but I think we do suffer the challenge that, and we've met them on countless occasions, where you get people who are speaking not from knowledge, not from direct experience, but from a point of view of theory, from a point of view of this is the correct way by the book to do it. And we know that construction projects aren't like that. Absolutely. Construction projects are dynamic.
It seems to me this is where the skills of the CDM coordinator come into play.
Mm-hmm. The soft skills, the negotiating skills that have been suggested within the ACOP, diplomacy, cajoling the design team along certain routes, but not dictating exactly what is a preconceived idea of the safety of that particular project. If he can catalyse that, he's done a good job.
Okay, let's look now at the files and plans that are crucial to the CDM regs and the coordinator's role in compiling those documents. CDM 2007 is in fact very simple here, requiring just 3 documents. Formal notification of the project, a construction phase health and safety plan, and a health and safety file. Peter, notification, presumably a simple process. Is it done by the coordinator, and is it just a case of ticking the right boxes?
It is. It's a case of just filling in the F10 and making sure that it's registered with the HSE. And these days you can do it electronically. The important thing there is that it's filled in correctly and filled in soon enough within the project. And the important thing also these days is that the client is part of that process. Previously in the older regulations, they were remote from notification, and it was very key to the HSE with the 2007 regs that they are part of that process, so they understand the responsibility that they're taking on. You go along
Absolutely.
with that, Paul?
Yes, agreed.
Peter mentions soon enough there. When is an appropriate moment for notification?
As soon thereafter that the planning supervisor, the CDMC has been appointed.
Okay, Paul, moving on to the construction health and safety plan. What are the typical contents here?
It's a fairly bureaucratic document which is trying to highlight the key construction elements of the works. Description of the job, arrangements on site, health and safety, plan, etc. But Peter and I really think that we're looking for the key significant issues coming out of that plan that relate to that specific project, rather than just the normal run-of-the-mill construction issues, which they often are full of. We're looking at the salient, significant issues.
And Peter, how do you assess the adequacy of the information?
Well, the way to look at it is the fact that the documentation is trying to present a picture to those going forward in procurement and on site, and indeed further than that into the building use and maintenance and cleaning. And the important thing there is to try and identify anything that's unusual, anything that's outside the norm of the general construction team's competence, bearing in mind that the client has already ensured that everybody in the team is competent. So we're identifying unusual aspects, Martin, that's the point.
Paul, what about revisions to the construction health and safety plan from design changes?
Yeah, certainly it should have mechanisms, whether they be change notices or some other bureaucratic form that's passed around the team, and that the health and safety input has the opportune time to comment. But beyond that, it's how that is integrated is a coordinated design team issue. But from the contractor's point of view, he just wants to make sure it's happening.
The important thing there, though, is to recognise that if the systems are slimmed down, if we don't produce too much paperwork, if we don't get sidetracked into issues which aren't necessarily relevant, then the key health and safety issues surface. And that's fundamental, I think. We quite often miss basic stuff because everybody is too bogged down in too much paperwork and distracted, their mind's taken off the ball.
Certainly this is where I think the site meetings are so crucial from that point of view, picking up those issues and resolving them without masses of bureaucracy.
Yeah.
So much more expedient.
And certainly too much bureaucracy was a criticism of the previous CDM reg. And Paul, perhaps it's worth saying, what's the function of the health and safety file?
Well, we have a file of information that tackles just about everything that could be relevant to the way in which the building is going to be operated and used and cleaned and maintained and everything else. We've got to make sure that we've got a completely rounded collection of information in that. Again, though, not overbearing, not too much bureaucracy, but just to the point, making sure that we're clear about how this building is going to be taken forward.
It's perhaps worth saying what the function actually is of the health and safety file. It's for those going forward.
Yeah, it's to help the client understand the safety issues, particularly of his building, and also be a reference document for future modifiers of that building, whether it be contractors or the client himself, understand the hidden issues, the hidden services, the hidden pre-tensioned members, which aren't obvious to someone just walking around or inspecting the drawings. And there's often a confusion between the O&M manuals and the health and safety file. O&M manuals should just record what was in the building, whereas a health and safety file highlights specific health and safety issues, but they should coordinate very much.
Peter, how is the health and safety file used by the CDM coordinator on a day-to-day basis?
It's far too easy for the CDMC to take the view that it should be all-inclusive and cover absolutely anything you could possibly think of. And as I say, that really defeats the object of the exercise. What we're looking for here is a clear document explaining, as Paul said, all the issues that are going to affect people later on. And one of the key problems we have at the moment is in refurbishing buildings where people do not know what they're getting into. There isn't enough information. So we hope for the future, clear reference to the health and safety file will enable people to have an understanding exactly of what that building is about and therefore make life safer in future. Paul,
you are a CDMC. Talk us through the coordinator's role in managing the file on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely agreed, and I have been asked to put too much in there and been pushed down that route, and much against my better nature, to be honest. And that is how the industry has matured and developed, and I think it's highlighting the significant issues at that stage is so critical.
Let's have a look at a case study. Our case study is a new office development to be built on a contaminated site adjacent to a canal. The steel and concrete structure have been designed to cantilever out over the canal. But the site is very small, meaning that every part of the design and construction process has to be planned very carefully. So Peter, where would you start in identifying and categorising risk?
Well, obviously there's a number of very significant issues there straight away that should alert everybody as to what needs to be done. You need a team that are experienced in that kind of work. You know, the site is constrained, you've got a water hazard, you've got a number of problems that need to be looked at straight away. The CDMC in that particular case should be somebody who's got a clear understanding of how those are all going to interact with each other, because they are so on top of one another, those problems, that you end up with thinking, well, okay, there's a combination of things that could possibly happen here. So we have to have clear experience involved in that kind of project, and we have to have some key early meetings, I would say, to identify precisely how those are going to be managed and taken forward.
So Paul, how often do these meetings take place and what exactly is involved?
Well, as I was mentioning earlier about the initial design, this is the stage you're at, and the contamination, the cantilevered and the water are obviously the three critical hazards on this particular job, and they need to be considered in a big way early on. Once those fundamentals decisions are made and signed off by a client, then we can go down more into the detail design and develop that up. But interesting with Peter here, I find an issue like a canal and cantilevering are fairly straightforward construction issues, really. And ground contamination is not anything we're that uncommonly finding. So really it's within most people's expertise, or if not, it's not beyond the wit of man to find that out. If it was a nuclear power station, I might have a different view, for example.
But I think really the point I was trying to pull out there, Paul, was the fact that in combination, all right, yes, you've got teams who are used to contaminated sites, canals or working near water and cantilevers, but putting those three together in a constrained site, that limits.
Add new challenges.
It has new challenges, and it limits the number of people who have experience in that particular arena, and you have to be careful there.
Paul, as the CDM coordinator, what would you be looking for particularly in the principal contractor's construction phase plan?
Well, again, not how he deals with the day-to-day and normal getting materials on site, etc., but how he's going to cope with the cantilevered over the canal particularly. The contamination issue is fairly straightforward from his point of view, but the cantilevered, how he's going to put up the temporary works, how the designers have hopefully thought of the maintenance and cleaning issues on that cantilevered elevation, but how he can deal with it as the temporary works come down, for example. And those are unusual issues which he's got to come forward with and present to you at that stage.
Peter, how would we cater for design changes, as inevitably there will be?
Well, again, it's keeping your eye on the ball and making sure that the relevant changes are put in. Every project is dynamic, and Paul mentioned I'm very fond of the iterative spiral. As you move forward in a project's development, you're closing down on solutions, but you're moving forward at the same time. But you have to make sure that what goes in the file is actually the relevant change. We have a plethora of documentation that's produced, and quite often it's very confusing. So again, the CDMC should be focused on making sure that they cut out all the stuff that nearly was incorporated and just focus on the final changes and the essence of what was done, and then you can rely on the documentation as it's handed over.
And Paul, we've had under CDM 2004, we've had the planning supervisor. Under CDM 2007, this has become the CDM coordinator. What do you think we can look forward to in the future?
Well, I would like to think very much that the CDMC becomes an integral part of the design team, rather than someone sitting on the side and coordinating them, that he is actually in there negotiating and dealing with and resolving issues which currently they don't sufficiently. Well, that's because they don't have enough experience, but also the regs don't actually ask it of them. And I don't see that they can sit at the design team table without bringing that to the table, to be frank.
Yeah. I think it is absolutely one of a more integrated team with people focused on the outcome rather than focused on regulations and what they're supposed to do. I think it's important to provide clients with value for money. It's also, in an interesting way, it's a challenge to provide value added. And I think that's the key challenge for CDMCs going forward into the future.
Wise words, Peter, as ever, certainly resonate with me. I'm afraid, gentlemen, that's all we have time for. Don't forget to take a look at the notes that accompany the programme, which are always worth a look. But from now, from all of us in the studio, till next time, goodbye.